What if I told you that the most powerful royal institution in the world wasn't shaken by scandal, wasn't shaken by politics, and wasn't shaken by constitutional crisis, but by the silent fear of a 7-year-old boy? What if the announcement that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace wasn't about the king's health, wasn't about royal succession, and wasn't about public controversy, but about the child the world knows for laughter, playful defiance, and mischievous balcony moments? Because this time it wasn't about duty. It wasn't about tradition. It wasn't about image. It was about something far more fragile. Behind the palace gates, beyond the ceremony, beyond the uniforms, beyond the carefully staged smiles, something was quietly unraveling. And when Buckingham Palace finally broke its silence, the tone alone told seasoned observers that this wasn't routine. There were no grand phrases, no institutional shield, no polished distance. Just weight, just urgency, just the unmistakable sense that something deeply personal had reached a breaking point. And when Prince William stepped forward, not as an heir, not as a future king, but as a father, the world realized this was no longer a royal headline. This was a human story. Because sometimes the greatest threat to tradition isn't scandal. It's vulnerability. And what the palace admitted about Prince Louis may mark one of the most transformative moments in modern royal history. Now let's uncover what really happened behind those walls and why this changes everything. Buckingham Palace has released a shocking statement, and this time it isn't about the King or the Princess of Wales. It's about the youngest royal the public knows for laughter, mischief, and fearless balcony moments, Prince Louis. Just when the world thought it had finally caught its breath after months of royal health concerns, a new announcement landed, sharp, sudden, and heavy enough to silence an entire country. Because what the palace has now acknowledged doesn't just shift headlines. It changes how people see Louis's future forever. And if you've ever thought, he's just a child, how serious could it be? This update makes it clear. It's serious, it's personal, and it's heartbreaking. Before we go deeper into what this could mean for the royal family, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss updates, because this story is unfolding fast and every detail matters. The words "urgent statement from Buckingham Palace" hit the airwaves like an alarm. Within minutes, cameras were repositioned, anchors changed their tone, and royal correspondents rushed to the palace gates, voices trembling as they tried to confirm what many viewers couldn't believe. This wasn't a routine bulletin, and it wasn't ceremonial language. In the palace's usual calm, polished style, they acknowledged something deeply human, something that had nothing to do with titles or protocol. This wasn't about duty, it was about a child in distress. What made it more unsettling was the silence beforehand. No leaks, no whispers, no slow build. Not even senior staff were reportedly briefed ahead of time. The statement arrived clean, prepared, and unmistakably intentional, sent directly from the palace press office with a tone that felt both strong and quietly devastated. It began with gratitude, thanking the public for their goodwill and referencing the family navigating a private situation involving Prince Louis. But the emotional weight in the wording was unusual. Royal watchers who study palace language closely noticed it immediately. The phrasing wasn't standard, it wasn't defensive, and it wasn't distant. It felt like something had reached a point where silence was no longer possible. Speculation erupted almost instantly. What could have gone wrong? Why now? Why Louis? After the King's health battle and the Princess of Wales's prolonged absence from public duties, some observers began to suggest that what the family was facing wasn't only medical, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply destabilizing. Royal correspondents called it one of the most unusually candid statements the palace had ever issued, because for once, image didn't appear to be the priority. Truth was. Across Britain, televisions stayed on, phones buzzed with messages, and even people who normally ignored royal coverage found themselves pausing, listening, and feeling something unexpected. Sympathy, because this wasn't just a royal story, it was a family story. The child who once made a nation laugh with spontaneous faces and playful antics was suddenly at the center of something frighteningly serious. Behind the scenes, the change was immediate. Calls were made discreetly, plans were delayed, and schedules were adjusted in ways the public couldn't fully see but could absolutely feel. Something inside the royal household had shifted, and the entire country sensed the ripple. This statement signaled the end of the Wales family's silence. To many, it confirmed a fear they'd barely dared to say out loud, that the youngest child, often seen as the brightest spark, may have been the one most deeply affected by the stress, illness, and upheaval of the past year. Yet one question remained unanswered, even as the world tried to read between every line of the palace's careful wording. What exactly is happening to Prince Louis? Then came the moment no one expected. Prince William stepped forward and spoke in a way the public had rarely seen before. There was no polished script, no rehearsed performance, and no royal distance. just a father standing in front of a storm trying to protect his son from the pressure of a nation watching his family strain under unbearable weight. William began with a long silence, the kind that tells you the truth is about to come out whether the speaker is ready or not. And then he said it plainly and painfully. Louis has been having a hard time. His voice cracked under the strain. For a man known for composure, it was startlingly raw. William described months inside their home that blurred together, nights filled with fear, quiet tension, and emotional exhaustion. The strain of the king's diagnosis and the uncertainty around Catherine's illness had carved a hollow space in their household, but William made it clear that the smallest heart was carrying the heaviest confusion. He spoke of restless nights when Louis would walk into their bedroom with wide, frightened eyes. He described sudden shifts from carefree mornings to heavy afternoons, dinners marked by silence and barely touched plates, and moments when Louis didn't know where to put his feelings because he was too young to understand what was happening, yet old enough to sense the danger. William admitted that he didn't recognize the warning signs at first. He had been overwhelmed by crisis management, public responsibilities, and the constant pressure of holding everything together. But the guilt in his words was unmistakable. He spoke about trying to hold the future of the monarchy in one hand and his family in the other, only to realize too late that something precious was slipping through his fingers. Then he shared the sentence that stunned the country, a quiet question Louis had asked that still haunted him. Will mommy leave like grandpa? In that moment, childhood innocence collided with the idea of permanent loss. And William acknowledged that this was the turning point, the moment that forced him and Catherine to rethink their priorities, their schedules, and even their silence. William then looked directly at the press and pleaded for space, not as a prince but as a parent. He asked for restraint, for compassion, and for the same consideration the public had offered Catherine during her recovery. He is only a boy, he said, let him heal in peace. Even seasoned reporters were shaken by the vulnerability in that room, but outside the palace walls, the story had already begun to twist as headlines tried to turn pain into speculation. Behind closed doors at Adelaide Cottage, the emotional weight continued to play out quietly. Princess Charlotte, usually steady and protective of her younger brother, was reportedly heard crying to her nanny, saying he didn't understand why she wasn't getting better. That was the harsh truth the family could no longer ignore. Louis wasn't simply sad, he was becoming emotionally isolated. Charlotte had tried for weeks to be his anchor, shielding him from whispered adult conversations and anxious looks exchanged when adults believe children aren't paying attention. She acted far beyond her years, but even strong children have limits. When Charlotte finally broke, it reportedly devastated Catherine because the pain wasn't only in Louis anymore. It was spreading through the family like a quiet fire. Louis changed in ways that frightened those closest to him. He lost his usual energy. He stopped racing down the stairs in the morning. Once inseparable from toys and outdoor games, he began spending hours alone, curled up and listless, barely responding even when Charlotte tried to pull him back into play. Meals passed in near silence, his plate untouched, not from disobedience but from confusion. The child known for lighting up rooms seemed to be dimming, and Catherine, despite her own fragility, could not ignore what was unfolding. A discreet suggestion of therapy surfaced, but it was met with hesitation and fear. The family dreaded how quickly compassion could be twisted into scandal, how tabloids might dissect a child's emotional pain as if it were gossip. Yet doing nothing was no longer possible. What made it even more painful was the growing gap between private reality and public image. The world still saw carefully timed smiles and polished family photos, but behind palace walls, a family was struggling to keep their children whole. It was a reminder that vulnerability is universal, even in royal households. Titles do not protect the heart, and lineage does not soften loss. Then came a decision that stunned those closest to the royal household. One weekday morning, Louis did not go to school. Teachers were informed, classmates were left confused, and it was quietly confirmed that he was being withdrawn immediately, no explanation and no return date. In royal circles, it was an extreme move, and to insiders it signaled one thing: the situation had reached a breaking point. Reports suggested the choice had been building for weeks, as William and Catherine tried to preserve stability, only to watch their son unravel in real time. According to internal sources, the tipping point was a simple classroom moment, one small question that cracked Louis's fragile emotional defenses. A classmate allegedly asked, "Is your mom still sick?" It wasn't cruelty, just childhood curiosity, but for Louis it triggered panic. He froze, shut down, refused to speak, and later refused to eat. By the next morning, he refused to return to school at all. A discreet emergency meeting followed with advisors and trusted staff, and the conclusion was immediate. Louis couldn't continue in that setting while the wounds were still open. He needed to be removed right away. No prepared narrative came with the decision, no media briefings, just swift action because the priority was no longer appearance but survival. Still, rumors spread. Journalists noted his absence from school functions and family events, and whispers grew louder. Had he been more affected by his mother's illness than anyone realized? Inside Adelaide Cottage, the atmosphere became intensely protective. Palace aides reportedly recommended short-term homeschooling under strict supervision, rare for modern royals. But William and Catherine felt they had no choice. Nothing was wrong with their son. He was simply in pain, overwhelmed, and silently struggling. Catherine, even while recovering, threw herself into being present for him. She sat beside him for long stretches, reading, listening, staying close, not forcing conversation, not demanding performance, just being his safe place. And slowly, Louis began to respond, because children don't heal through public statements. They heal through consistency, tenderness, and time. Even so, every decision had to be weighed against public reaction. The family couldn't risk another media frenzy, and advisors began drafting what they called a recovery plan, a long-term strategy to reduce Louis's exposure and rebuild his emotional security. Quietly, psychological consultants were brought in. The goal was simple and unprecedented in tone. For the first time in modern royal life, a child with a title was being allowed to do one thing only: heal. Then unexpectedly, a figure few predicted stepped forward as a stabilizing force. Princess Anne. Known for her toughness and blunt realism, Anne made a quiet promise behind the scenes. She refused to let Louis be swallowed by fear or by the silence that has historically defined royal suffering. It began with a private conversation between Anne and William. No aides, no protocol, just family. William, reportedly exhausted, admitted he felt like he'd lost touch with his son. Catherine was trying everything, yet Louis remained emotionally distant, trapped behind layers of anxiety that buried his joy. Anne didn't offer soft comfort. She offered a plan: send him to her, let him use his hands, let him listen to birds, not whispers. Without fanfare, Louis was brought to Anne's country home. No press releases, no staged photos, no ceremonial framing, just distance from commotion and closeness to calm. Within days, a different rhythm took hold. Mornings began with routine rather than royal instruction. Louis was given small tasks: watering plants, clearing leaves, planting seeds, simple responsibilities that grounded him. Anne worked beside him, telling stories of childhood mischief and scraped knees, recalling horses, arguments, laughter, and the ordinary chaos of growing up. Not crowns, not scandals, not pressure. And slowly something shifted. Louis began to ask questions again. A smile returned, then laughter. The heaviness didn't disappear, but it loosened. Anne's method was firm, steady, and unromantic, but it was exactly what a child needs when life feels unpredictable. One afternoon, she introduced him to the stables and explained that riding wasn't about showing off. It was about trust, control, and confidence. For Louis, it became instinctive. Each ride didn't just move his body, it moved fear out of him. Wind replaced tension, space replaced suffocation. In those wide pastures, the child who had been trapped indoors by worry began slowly to breathe again. Behind the scenes, Anne became a quiet pillar for William and Catherine. She didn't sugarcoat the situation, but she offered something they hadn't felt in months: reassurance. In one especially emotional exchange, she reportedly told Catherine that Louis had Diana's fire, he just needed direction. The words landed with weight because Diana too was once misunderstood, and now her grandson was rediscovering light under the guidance of someone who understood the cost of royal silence. But just as Louis's world began to stabilize, the palace was rocked by another shock, one that threatened to turn healing into scandal all over again. A leaked internal memo allegedly revealed plans to reduce Louis's visibility not purely for his well-being, but to protect the monarchy from the appearance of emotional instability. If true, the implication was chilling. Someone inside the institution as framing a child as a liability. The language described was clinical and icy, more like a crisis management manual than a care plan, filled with phrases about minimizing exposure and controlling scrutiny. It suggested that disappearing Louis from public view was safer than admitting the vulnerability the family had been forced to reveal. William was reportedly furious. Behind closed doors, he demanded to know who authorized such language and why it had been discussed without his knowledge. For a father already carrying guilt and fear, the idea that palace bureaucracy saw his son as a public relations problem was unbearable. Catherine's response, according to sources, was even sharper. She reportedly called the document inhumane, accusing senior staff of hiding behind titles to avoid moral responsibility. The fallout sent shockwaves through palace ranks, especially coming from a woman known publicly for calm, restraint, and grace. Then Anne stepped into the storm. After quietly helping Louis rediscover joy, she challenged those responsible and made her position clear in a rare internal confrontation. You don't hide children, you keep them safe. In that instant, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, senior royals appeared to side publicly against the institution's cold instincts. Outside the palace, the public began demanding answers. People noticed Louis's absence stretching into months and pressed harder. Where was he, and was he all right? Under growing pressure, Buckingham Palace finally released what many believed should have been said earlier: the full truth. In a follow-up statement, the palace revealed the burden the family had been carrying, confirming that this was about Louis's mental and emotional well-being, not mere behavior, not schooling, not a phase. The language was remarkably direct. It stated that Prince Louis and his family were receiving support for emotional healing.
That spoke volumes.
Those words alone,
homeschooling was
emotional
arranged
healing,
swiftly,
sent shock through the
overseen by
media and the
professionals
monarchy
who
itself,
understood.
because Buckingham rarely speaks that plainly. There were no euphemisms and no coded phrases. It was raw human truth, and it quietly shattered the myth of royal invulnerability. The statement was accompanied by something even more intimate, a brief handwritten note from Catherine. She wrote that although he is young, he is strong, and as a family they are finding their way through this together. It didn't read like a royal message. It read like a mother speaking to the world as a parent, not a figurehead. That single note made everything suddenly relatable. Social media flooded with solidarity. Parents shared stories of their own children struggling with anxiety and grief. Educators spoke about how easily children absorb fear. Mental health organizations praised the openness and called it a turning point in challenging generational stigma, especially stigma surrounding emotional suffering in children. Inside palace walls, staff quietly confirmed what many had suspected. The silence had been worse than the truth. A public reckoning followed. Critics compared Catherine's candor to Princess Diana's, pointing out how both women disrupted royal tradition by choosing truth over appearance. Now William and Catherine were doing something similar, not to create headlines but to create healing. In doing so, they redefined strength inside the monarchy, not a stiff upper lip, but the courage to admit what's painful and real. The palace confirmed that Louis's days were now structured around recovery rather than duties. Afternoons included art therapy, painting emotions he still couldn't fully name. Nature walks replaced flashing cameras. Birdsong replaced noise. There were no official commitments, no rehearsals, no forced appearances, only the slow work of rebuilding safety inside a small heart. But in the middle of this wave of sympathy, a new controversy ignited when Prince Harry spoke out from across the Atlantic. In an interview, he criticized the palace's history of managing young royals under pressure and said, "This is what I warned you about." He described being told to perform, smile, and toughen up while struggling privately, claiming that hiding suffering for appearances leaves permanent scars. Meghan echoed the message with a blunt remark: protecting children must always come before protecting an institution's reputation. Their comments shifted the conversation, turning what had been a vulnerable moment for the Wales family into a sharper critique of the palace system itself. Inside Kensington Palace, the response was reportedly swift and tense. Sources suggested William was furious, viewing Harry's comments as exploitation rather than concern, weaponizing a delicate situation for his own narrative. Catherine tried to remain focused on Louis's recovery, but disappointment lingered. The family had opened up for peace, not publicity, and now their vulnerability had been pulled into a public feud at the most fragile pose. Sybil moment. Even so, some insiders quietly admitted that Harry's words, though inflammatory, forced a conversation long overdue, whether any child should ever have to pay the emotional price of the crown. Debate exploded across newspapers and television. Some accused Harry of chasing attention. Others argued he was voicing an uncomfortable truth no one else dared to say. Palace officials scrambled to regain control and redirect focus toward Louis's well-being, but the storm had already grown larger, turning emotional into political and private into public spectacle. And through it all, the most important voice remained missing, not because of neglect, but because of innocence. Prince Louis stayed silent while adults argued, yet days later a quiet moment emerged that spoke louder than any argument ever could. A photograph surfaced showing Louis kneeling beside his mother in a garden, helping her plant a flower. No ceremony, no press line, no staged smiles, just a child and his mother side by side. The image was shared privately by a family acquaintance, then spread rapidly across the world. Because in that soft, ordinary frame, people saw something powerful: resilience. Louis was smiling again, not because cameras demanded it, but because he felt safe. Catherine, still recovering, guided his hand gently, and the world recognized the moment instantly as real, not curated, not managed, not performative. It was calm, stolen from chaos, and it offered something no statement could create: hope. The photo shifted public sentiment. People stopped focusing on leaks and accusations and sides. What mattered was the reminder that behind palace walls lives a family struggling, learning, surviving just like any other. Support surged not only for Louis but for William and Catherine, praised for choosing honesty over perfection, care over appearances, and healing over performance. Parents shared stories of children facing anxiety and grief. Mental health organizations reported renewed attention to child well-being. Without trying, Louis became a symbol, not of privilege but of progress. Quietly, conversations began behind the scenes about what this could mean for his future. Not as a duty, not as a role forced onto him, but as a possibility shaped by experience. Could Louis one day become a royal advocate for children's mental health, not from obligation but from lived understanding? For now, no one placed titles on it and no one pressured him. He was simply allowed to heal. And that may be the most important shift of all. A story that began with fear has started to rewrite itself into something else. The child once seen as fragile is now being recognized as brave. The family that feared his silence is now watching his voice slowly return. And the monarchy, so often criticized for rigidity, has taken a step towards something human, honest, and real. This began as a heartbreaking announcement, but for Prince Louis, it may become the beginning of something far bigger. A life shaped not by performance, but by heart. If this story made you think differently about power, vulnerability, or what strength truly means, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Because here, we don't just follow headlines, we uncover the human stories behind them. And the next chapter of this royal journey may reveal even more than anyone expects. Stay with us.